The Atarian magazine was short-lived, and honestly it was an obvious sales piece created under Atari's guidance. But it was a neat idea, and in a different world, a very different world, it could have been Atari's Nintendo Power. It covered all the consoles of Atari in the late 80s, such as the 2600, 7800, and XEGS. And in one issue of the magazine, they had a section based on an Atari 8-bit game known as Necromancer. This was not my first time hearing about this game, but it was my first time seeing any screenshots of it. And this was the XEGS game that I had personally the most interest in playing. I wish it had seen a 7800 release so I could have finally gotten to experience it. But recently I obtained my first XEGS console, and finally have a way to give it a try. So let's find out if I missed out on a cult classic, or if this game deserves to be left in the past with so many other archaic computer titles. Necromancer was developed by Bill Williams for Synapsys Software back in 1982. It was released on the Atari 8-bit and Commodore 64, and eventually made its way to the XEGS via a re-release in 1988. This is the version I'm reviewing today. You take the role of Illuminar, who is apparently not a necromancer, but rather a generic wizard. And you must traverse 3 screens in order to take on Tetragorn, who is the necromancer in this game, and stop him to take over his graveyard. The story is, well, what you would expect from a game of its time. Very imaginative and inventive, with lots of fun and silly character names. But it holds little bearing on the game itself, and that, of course, is to be expected. When you first power on Necromancer, you're greeted with an underwhelming title screen, with all the relative information, such as high scores, copyright dates, etc. And there's also a tree in the upper right corner. Once you start the game, you see a wizard in the middle of a screen and a bunch of monsters running onto the screen from the left and right. The first time I played, I thought my copy was broken, honestly. I could barely figure out how to do anything. But I'll explain if you've never played Necromancer before. So the wizard in the middle is you, and your objective is to plant and grow as many trees as possible. You use the joystick to move a flashing orb around the screen, and by simply touching the ogres that run onto the screen with it, you will kill them. But you must also use this orb to designate where trees will be planted by pressing the button. You must protect these trees from the ogres or they'll get cut down. You will also encounter a monster whose death presents you with more seeds to grow more trees, and a spider that poisons your fully grown trees and will kill them unless you run your orb over them. The gameplay is sort of fun and chaotic for a minute, but I have to be honest, it made my wrists hurt after only a short period of time. I tried several other control methods and gamepads, and I have to say that a standard gamepad is the way to go. But the repetitive gameplay does create some arm pains no matter what you use. But one thing I wouldn't call this game is boring, as this is only the first of 3 screens you'll encounter. Once your strength depletes here, you won't die as expected, but rather move onto the second screen of the game. And once again, you're thrown into the screen and expected to learn more unique controls. And this feels a little unfair, I guess. You move the orb as you would on the past screen, but now your goal is wholly different. You must hold down the button to move your wizard while collecting question marks to build ladders and climb down them, through a total of 5 levels of these tunnels. On the right side of the screen, the trees you planted and grew are still present, and you'll use the orb to control them and run them over various holes in the floor. Hopefully they'll have enough time to take root and kill the spiders before they spawn and leave those holes, otherwise you'll pay for it on the next screen. But I personally just found it more advantageous to just move as quickly as possible through this section. If I'm honest, this is the most boring part of Necromancer for me, and the one where the mechanics seem to work the least. The spiders that spawn are very deadly, and if you're not near the bottom of the screen when they do spawn, well, you might as well kiss some of your strength goodbye. The hands that reach for you will occasionally leave and move around the question marks, but I found I was mostly okay if I made a beeline for them. Once through this section, you'll find yourself in a graveyard, which is the final screen, and by this point, you should be able to make sense of the controls quickly, even if what you're supposed to do isn't evident immediately. Spiders are all over, and depending how many hatched in the previous area, you might have an insurmountable number of them to contend with. But your objective is simply to touch each gravestone and thus destroy them. The enemy Necromancer is here too, warping all around in a bid to destroy you. Once again, you can kill the spiders and the Necromancer with the orb, and I recommend only doing this if they're right in your face. Otherwise, you can ignore them and just focus on the tombstones. Once you clear them all, you do this again, and again, and again. As far as I can tell, the game continues with this graveyard screen until you die. And that sums up just about everything there is in Necromancer. It's an early computer game, and one with some more depth than the games that preceded it had, to be sure. It's also a game that I was very excited to finally try, and a game I had always wondered about as a kid. Heck, I even wondered about it as an adult. And maybe I hyped it up too much, but I just couldn't help but to be disappointed. And it's for a few main reasons. First, the game is kind of painful to play. Maybe it's my old age and deteriorating wrists, but I can play other games for several hours and have no issues. I also found it a bit of a chore to figure out what I was supposed to be doing on each screen. And once I did figure it out, well, I couldn't help but to feel kind of underwhelmed by what the game was giving me. Now, had I played this game back in the 80s or 90s, my feelings might have been different. But being introduced to it today, well, I just don't think it's very good, unfortunately. And I do love older games, even ones I haven't played before. I thought that Dreadnought Factor and Blueprint on the 5200 were fine games, even with the stock controller. And I didn't experience those games until this year or late last year. The point is, I feel like Necromancer is close to being a good game, but it never made it over that hump of being fun for me. And before we wrap things up, I do want to hit on the graphics and audio quickly. Because graphically, given the time frame that the game was produced, developed, and released, it's not a bad looking game. You can recognize everything for what they are. It's pretty evident who the wizards are, who the enemies are, and what items you should be picking up. And the tunnel levels look pretty cool. The audio is a bit, maybe repetitive at times, but it's not bad by any means. It looks and sounds like a game that might have been a classic in another world. All the elements were there, and Necromancer has some unique ideas here and there. But maybe with a few tweaks, alterations, and additions, it could have been made more enjoyable for myself. I guess we'll never know. What we will know about, however, is what score I plan on giving Necromancer, because we're heading into the Atari Network pros and cons section right now. Starting with the pros, I want to say that having 3 unique screens was ambitious for the time, and made me stick with the game longer than I might have otherwise done so. Learning each screen was pretty interesting, if not a tad confusing. And having each screen be affected by the previous one is a smart move. It makes everything feel connected. Grow trees in the first screen that help you in the second screen, prevent spiders in the second screen that will attack you in the third, and so on. Graphically, the game is fine, and looks like many others that we consider classics of the time. And I even think the audio is well done and pleasant to listen to most of the time. But with all that, well, we're already onto the cons. And I have to start by saying that this game hurt me, literally. It's a pain in the wrist for me to play. And it's hard to understand what you're supposed to do without looking it up. Generally, you do know who the good guys and bad guys are, but dealing with the threats is not properly explained or easy to figure out. And your goal isn't easy to figure out either. I also feel like some of the screens are just more fun than others, and more challenging. Necromancer felt so close to being a fun game, but it just never made it over that hump for me. And thus I spent most of my time wondering when it would start to get good. So with all that said, I'm going to give Necromancer on the Atari XEGS 2 one-button joysticks out of 5. I don't want to offend fans of this game, but I don't think it's worth going back to today. Well, it's not worth it for people who don't have nostalgia for it. I really wanted to like Necromancer, I really did, but I just didn't. But I think you're all tired of hearing what I have to say, and what I think about this game, so now it's time to hear what all of you think. Is Necromancer worth picking up and playing today? Have you tried the Commodore 64 version? And if so, is it better? And do you agree with my score and assessment of the game? Let me know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I do all Atari content here on the channel, so hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I upload. And please, check out my social media and the Discord server. Tons of classy Atarians are already there talking everything Atari with each other. And please consider becoming a Patreon if you enjoy my content. I have $2 and $5 tiers with exclusive audios and more, and YouTube members get access to videos a day early. These people have already joined, and I can't thank them enough. You guys rock. Okay guys, enough self-promotion, let's wrap this up. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a madman planting trees to do my bidding in the next phase of my life here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians.